Okay, so now Karen, you want to take it away?
Yes, hello everyone, and welcome all of you to Cleaver Magazine's issue number 42 contributors reading. My name is Karen Ryle, and I'm the founding and chief editor of Cleaver. For those of you not familiar with Cleaver, we are a quarterly literary magazine and an occasional book review. We publish craft essays and interviews, and we host a workshop series. 2023 marks our 10th anniversary as a magazine in this world. We published our first full issue in March 2013. It seems like just yesterday, although when you think of all we've been through in this world since then, it's been quite a long time. When you can find our first issue and all of our previous issues linked on the website. About our name, cleave is a Janus word, also known as an auto-antonym, meaning both itself and its opposite. To cleave is both to stick tight and to fall away. A cleaver is the most broad-edged and brutally efficient kitchen knife, designed to be swung like a hammer for the most effective channel of force. Cleave also means to come together with strong attachment. Cleaver runs its literary magazine on 100% volunteer labor with many fine editors whose invaluable contributions make our magazine possible. I serve as head fiction editor and webmaster and graphic designer and chief cook and bottle washer. The buck stops here if you have any Cleaver-related issues. And speaking of issues, I am tremendously proud of issue 42 with its extraordinary collection of talented writers, and I am privileged to bring them to you tonight. Oops. I was admitting someone and I lost my text. Thanks so much, all of you, for attending and supporting our readers. And thank you to our senior flash editor, Catherine Kolpa, our poetry editor, Claire Olson, our nonfiction editor, Sydney Temerine, and all of our fine editors, including Andrea Caswell, who's here at the reading tonight, and she's a fiction editor as well. And thank you to our workshop director, Tricia Park, who organized this reading. We're so proud of our workshop and masterclass series. The last 2 4-week classes of the summer session will begin next week, and there's still time to enroll if you're interested. We have writing from photographs taught by Suzanne Scanlon. That's Tuesday evenings in August, and playing towards poetic form taught by Alex Wells Shapiro Wednesday nights in August. Everything is on Zoom. We have an exciting lineup of 2-hour masterclasses, which have been taking place on Sunday afternoons this summer. And you can purchase access to recordings of these workshops. I particularly recommend You Incorporated, Building Your Own Writing Brand, taught by Jennifer Matthew, who's a branding and marketing expert. And it's got some really great information for writers in this 21st century. It's also not too late to grab a spot in Urgency and the Personal Essay, taught by Megan Steelstra, on Sunday, August 20th, 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time. Seats are limited by our Zoom account, so try to sign up early if you can. The workshops support the magazine, and they're terrific, and we keep them affordable, and we so much appreciate your support. We'll be announcing our fall-winter series of workshops and masterclasses soon. The other news is that we have a cool collaboration upcoming with Drexel University's Entrepreneurial Game Studio, developing a sort of Pokemon Go style video game for poetry, funded by the William Penn Foundation, and there'll be more on that later. It's really been very interesting working with gamers to develop a poetry app. Anyway, and the winners and finalists of our poetry competition will be published in the September issue. So take it away, Tricia.
Thanks, Karen. So if you guys want to keep an eye on the chat, I'm going to drop in our reading list so that our readers know where they are. And then also so that you guys can sort of keep on top of the links that we'll be dropping in as well, so that you can read along. But we also, because this is a virtual space, we encourage you to use your reaction buttons for hearts and celebrations and claps. You can clap like this, so you can clap audibly, whatever you like to do. Just stay muted while the reading is going on. And then also, if you, at any point during the reading there's something that really pops out, or you just want to offer words of support, please do utilize the chat. So first up, we're going to have John Chopan, and his piece is an examination of the text as it pertains to the divorce and subsequent romance between characters XX and XY. And we're going to drop in the chat here. And let me make an introduction. So John is an associate professor of creative writing at Eckerd College. He received his BA and MA in American history from SUNY Oswego and his MFA from the Ohio State University. His first collection, Pulled from the River, was published by Black Lohrenz Press in 2012. He is the winner of the 2017 Grace Paley Prize for short fiction for his second collection, Veterans Crisis Hotline, which was published by the University of Massachusetts Press in October 2018. His work has appeared in Glimmer Train, Hotel America, Post Road, Epiphany, the Southampton Review, and elsewhere. Welcome, John.
Hello. Okay, so I'm going to read. I won't read that title because it's extremely long, but something about divorce and subsequent romance. That's all you need to keep in mind, I suppose. All right, so it's an index, so it reads a little weird, but we'll see how it goes. Rabid, which is the only way to describe XY's love, even now when XX is gone, when she is off and out in the world like a storm front. Racket, the way XY and XX pretend that they are not in love, or the ways they are, late at night with XX's new lover gone, talking for hours, arguing, crying, laughing about why XY is no good for XX, or how XX is still wonderful and crazy. And sometimes just listening to one another breathe, imagining that they are lying there pressed back to back because they sleep in opposite directions, and XX saying to XY, snuggle back, meaning get close, meaning let me feel the heat in your shoulders and press your head to mine. Rainy day fund, and the postcard XX sent XY reading, quote, meet me in Vegas. I'll wear my best pair of cutoffs and cash in my rainy day fund. I'll treat you real good. Don't say no, Ruthie. Randy, one of those words XY would use in bed, and XX would smile or laugh or call him a goof, like when XY would stand there after sex, still erect, and declare himself boner boy while striking a Superman pose. Ravenous, the way XX loved XY. Reading letters mailed from XX to XY in which he mentions missing the way he smells and his Woody Woodpecker laugh, and maybe even sometimes his jokes. Realize that XY misses XX's hands, the way XX's body is so hot all the time, like a furnace, like when she rolls over and says, you're so sweaty, and he says, you're making me sweaty. XX will never come back. Rear end, XY's favorite part, if pressed on the issue. Reasons for XY to love XX, her hands, her writing, her tattoos, and let's be honest, she is beautiful. For XX to love XY, he loves her, he won't stop chasing after her. They have a kind of language, and let's be honest, he is, in the right light, boyishly handsome. Red lipstick XX wore to kiss XY on the cheek, marking him as hers, so that everyone at the party would know. Regrets, which XY refuses to acknowledge any more than he just has, because it was obvious that he'd picked this word. Rendezvous, in the woman's room, backseat of the car, street, XX singing, why don't we do it in the road, on the coffee table, which was not as good as they'd hoped, dining room table, which was a kind of accident, but was much better than expected. Respect, self, and how XY will eventually have to walk away, how he cannot wait forever, if only because XX won't love him anymore. Rhythm, and the note XX left in XY's pocket reading, you really had the rhythm last night. Riddle, as means of communication, as constructed confusion, as last line of defense, that XX put to XY, what is better than one orgasm? 2. Ripple effect, how XX's poems and letters make XY miss her, think of her light blue eyes, and how that reminds him of home in Lake Ontario and all the winter weather coming off it, and that no matter how cold it is, XX is always XY's center, his solution for sadness and regret. Romantic, the notion that XY can win XX back, the feeling that XX is coming back, the idea that two people are meant for one another. Ruth, also known as Bingo Wing, Gatsby, Love, Rabbit, Ruthless, which is what it feels like when XX says to XY, I don't think you'll ever forgive me, which is why I am still with him. because it fails to take into account how long XY has loved XX, or how he is capable of forgiveness, or that perhaps all he wants now is to forgive, to apologize, to analyze all his own missteps and say, I will forgive you if you can forgive me, which is what XX intended when he wrote an index for XX, because he wants to win her back, knows that this may mean trading in a little self-respect, may mean doing anything, everything, may make things pathetic, vile, distorted, may mean things will be done and or said that can never be taken back. See also romantic, see also run, see also Ruth. Thank you.
Thank you. That was beautiful, John. Up next, we have Leonard Kress. And let me drop the link to Leonard's piece here. And Leonard has published poetry, translations, nonfiction, and fiction in the Missouri Review, Massachusetts Review, Iowa Review, American Poetry Review, Harvard Review, and others. Among his collections are The Orpheus Complex, Walk Like Bo Diddley, Live in the Candy Store, and Other Poems, and his new verse translation of the Polish romantic epic Pan Tadzuc by Adam Mickiewicz, pardon my pronunciation. Craniotomy Sestinas appeared in 2021. He has received multiple grants from the Pennsylvania Council on the Arts and the Ohio Arts Council. He currently lives in Blackwood, New Jersey, and teaches at Temple University. Welcome, Leonard.
Thank you. My poem is Colloquy of Young Mothers on Venango Street. Venango Street is a street in the Kensington section of Philadelphia where I lived a few years back. And it's a sonnet with a very Wallace Stevens-like title, although I'm not sure the subject matter is something Stevens would ever attempt. Colloquy of Young Mothers on Venango Street. By 1 a.m., they hoard the crossroad stoops, spotlit by squealing cars and vans, each beam gilding an icon nimbus in mounting loops of hair. They gaze impassive at the stream of boyfriend fathers whose beery grind embodied now wails, ham hock babies hammocked in strollers, collapsible as ancient empires. Each deed of love begets its own insatiable railers against, to pass around, who at, and compare. Initiates impenetrable now, these girls who chat like their own mothers, children who could not care less, we stalk through corner-hanging danger for that transfiguring kiss, all of them distractedly plant on the velveteen globe of each infant. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. That was beautiful. Up next, we have Samantha Padgett. And hold on one second. Samantha received an MFA in creative writing, publishing, and editing from Sam Houston State University in Huntsville, Texas. Her work has been featured or is upcoming in New Ohio Review, Poet Lore, New South, North American Review, and elsewhere. She currently lives in Austin, Texas with her partner and cat. Welcome, Samantha.
Hi, all. This is a piece I wrote about the time during the pandemic. I was in graduate school and I moved home for about 6 months, and I lived with my mom and my great-grandmother, who was actually turning 98 on Wednesday. And so it's a piece set during the pandemic, but I wouldn't call it a pandemic piece. It's more of a exploration of the maternal line. So an unnamed essay in which the world ends, but I'm told everything is okay. My mother is panicking. I know this despite her insistence that she isn't afraid. After days of listening to the newscaster detail the refrigerator trucks being filled with overflow bodies, my mother buys 20 pounds of potatoes from a local farmer. She doesn't tell us until it's done. I spend hours sitting with my great-grandmother. The air in her room is thick and gummy, keeps her space heater on high even after Easter passes. She's 96 and lonely. But I'm right here, I tell her. But you weren't there. You can't understand. My mother and I return home from our weekly grocery store run. We strip off our clothes at the door, take turns cleaning each other's backs with Clorox wipes. Together, we wash each item brought into the house. We soak the fresh produce in hot water and dish soap. Everything else is sprayed down with bleach. Another day passes, and my mother is still arguing with my sister. She wants her to drive up from Dallas to get her potatoes. My sister's exasperated voice muffles out from the receiver. Ridiculous. How will you eat? My mother keeps insisting. One day I'll be gone, and how will you eat? Growing up, my mother tells me stories of her childhood dinners. On Mondays, we'd have beans, cornbread, and bologna. On Tuesdays, we'd have bologna, beans, and cornbread. On Wednesday, we'd have cornbread, bologna, and beans. It's summer and the house always smells like sugar. My mother can make cookies out of anything. We spend afternoons at the library taking turns reading books to each other. I'm young, so young, when my mother tells me I have to get out. Don't be like me. Every day feels a little more dystopian. I line up outside the Walmart and watch the worker deemed essential count each customer as they go inside the store. We stop washing the groceries. I'm seeing a therapist again. I talk to her in my bedroom over Zoom. I tell her about my childhood, how my mother never let me quit anything once I started. I'm sorry I ruined your life, my mother says to me later in the kitchen. My great-grandmother likes to tell me about her brothers. She recounts their deaths like they're little piggies. This one died in a fire, this one was hit by a train, and this one cried wham, wham, wham as he drowned in a lake. Only once does she tell me about a brother that made it to adulthood. The last month of my first pregnancy, he wouldn't leave my side, slept on the floor next to my bed. She pauses before adding, I don't remember how he died. When my mother finally accepts that we'll never eat through the potatoes before they rot, she brings what remains of them to the curb. I watch as she rocks the bucket of potatoes down the driveway, and for a moment, she's helping a toddler take their first steps. I see the hands wrapped around my mother's fingers, their legs jutting out one after another as if they aren't sure the earth will still be there. She tapes a sign to the bucket of potatoes, free, feed your families. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Samantha. That was beautiful. Up next, we have J. Bradley Minnick. And J. Bradley Minnick is a writer, public radio host, and producer, and a professor of English at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock. He has written, edited, and produced the 1-minute spot Facts About Fiction and Arts and Letter Radio, a show celebrating modern humanities with a concentration on Arkansas cultural and intellectual work that can be found at artsandlettersradio.org. He has published numerous journal articles and fiction in Toadstuck Review, Burning Word Literary Journal, Literary Stories, Inklet Magazine, and Potato Soup Journal, and Potato Soup Journal's Best of 2022 anthology. Forthcoming work will be featured in The Ground Up and Southwest Review. Welcome, Jay Minnick.
Thank you so much, Tricia. And thank you, Karen, and everybody. This magazine is just beautiful. So appreciate you all being here. This story is called The Bankrupt Circus, and I kind of think it speaks for itself. It's a bit of a satire, so here we go. As far as I could tell, Mr. Rancer imagined himself the middleman of garage sales. In the late spring, he frequented them most weekends when he wasn't tending to his lawn, bought the most unusual items, and then waited for his fortunes to improve by staging his own Super Saver Summer Solstice garage sale blowout. That's what his sign said anyway. Problem was, when it came to resell the junk, Mr. Rancer never remembered quite how much he had originally paid, and he never put price tags on anything. Each time one tried to hand him his money, he insisted on haggling for both fun and profit. Mr. Rancer would wait for an offer and then begin right away to drive up the price. Simple supply and demand, he would say. You'd know this, DC, if you ever had the G's to ante up and take macroeconomics. Simple liquidity, son. The beauty of the free market at work right here in the old neighborhood. The two miniature unicycles, Mr. Rancer told me, had belonged to the bankrupt circus, and they had only been ridden by clowns, not bear cubs. Rancer said he picked them up for a song. The bankrupt circus, he explained, had gone belly up and stalled just outside of Highmont. Bank officials, Rancer told me, had seized nearly everything. And when it was clear the bankrupt circus would forever be insolvent, officials began selling off items in lots. Immediately, I could tell Mr. Rancer regretted that he had tipped his hat and whispered, Nick, let's just keep these little particulars between you and me, okay? Along with the unicycles, Rancer bought flashy fringe costumes worthy of tightrope walkers and trapeze artists, and he displayed these costumes all along the concrete walls of his garage. Additionally, he had procured a human cannon, 2 whips. He refused to sell these to children, said he was going to use them on anyone who stepped on his grass, 2 giant spheres, you could climb into them and roll around, and 3 hoops, he lectured. An enterprising performer could light on fire and juggle. For weeks that June, we had seen unemployed circus performers hanging around Highmont's town limits with their animals, monkeys in military vests and caps, tiny pigs in summer dresses, and bear cubs wearing spiked collars, waiting for the 51C bus. A photographer for the Highmont Chronicle snapped a photo expose posing the down-and-out strongman, an unkempt, bearded woman, a flaccid Muscles the Clown, and a tattooed fire eater holding the ends of the leashes attached to the befuddled animals who in the pictures looked forlorn, sick, and down in the mouth. Such stories usually go unnoticed, but this one, perhaps because of its high pathos, caught fire. And before Highmont could issue damage control, our best local newsman, Yippee Freeman, was busy interviewing the bankrupt circus performers. The following statement was issued by Yippee by Muscles the Clown on KUKY. When a clown, willing and humble, can't get work in America, the whole meritocracy is dead. Muscles the Clown was, of course, alluding to a whole way of life that had, in fact, been taken away when those multinational corporations had moved in right next to so many of Highmont's independent mom and pop stores, places like the Bread Depot. On television, the circus performers were not drunk, although one would not have blamed them had they been. Instead, they used their wits and innate understanding of the entertainment news capital of America was becoming, all an illusion. And they grabbed the big, fat, ill-fitting keys to even the most cynical grown-up child's heart. Muscles the Clown, because of his facility with standard English, quickly became the spokesman for the group of cast-out circus performers, all of whom decided exactly when it was best to get let go of their leashes. CBS broke the story nationally, and 20 million viewers tuned in. Each night, experts sounded off and provided multi-screen commentary underneath sad pictures. The town of Highmont was forced to issue an unremorseful apology for closing down the circus and trying bit by bit to sell it off. Nobody believed the town officials' apologies, and this belief turned America irate and further stoked the viral ether. In America, Muscles the Clown said, a half-assed apology is worse than no bleeping apology at all. 20 million viewers didn't even move to cover their children's ears, nor was there the expected outrage over Muscles the Clown's poor and uncalibrated statements. Even 11-year-olds like us recognized that Muscles the Clown had spoken from his real, not his rubber heart. He was a person underneath that painted-on clown smile, after all.
Wonderful. Thank you. Up next, we have Grayson Thompson. Let me just get to your page. Grayson is a Black, queer, transgender man, a poet moonlighting as a therapist. He's been featured in Bellatrist magazine, High Shelf Press, Cathesis, Northwest Press, and forthcoming in Beyond Words literary magazine. A wanderer, he chooses madness of the wild, of truth, of love, and of dreaming. He hopes you can find some in his poems. Welcome, Grayson.
Thank you. I'm going to read my poem, Juniper Poplar. The title comes from my first dorm at University of South Florida, where I learned how to write. My professor's actually in this Zoom, I'm realizing. It's a true story about a guy I knew who really did lose 100 pounds by getting addicted to running when I was first learning how to be a man. Juniper Poplar. I knew a guy who lost over 100 pounds by running away from himself. He taught me to start small, like a building, and eventually turn the world over with my feet. The first block felt like getting hit by an alabaster whale. The dark wooded bridge reminded me of how fast ghosts can run. I wrapped myself in Swisher sweets and smoke. The burn makes everything okay in the end. When my time comes, bury me in a coffin of compliments, because even what you hate deserves to rest. My bones are made of moon ashes. Let the earth swallow me whole. I've always wondered what it felt like to move a tide. Thank you.
Wow, beautiful. Thank you so much, Grayson. Up next, we have Sarah. Sarah Myers is a Minneapolis-based playwright, theater artist, and essayist. Her plays have been published by Playscripts Inc., Spout Press, and New Madrid, and produced in New York, Chicago, Austin, and Minneapolis. Her nonfiction has appeared or is forthcoming in Fourth Genre, New Letters, TDR, The Drama Review, Studies in Musical Theater, among others. She holds an MFA in playwriting and a PhD in theater from UT Austin. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Trisha. Okay. One sec. You're buying tampons, brushing your hair, cleaning the crud off the kitchen table, and the sight of your own stupid fingers reminds you that the bottom has dropped out of everything. Then you're talking to a colleague or a friend or a weird and lovely student, and you smile with every inch of your teeth because you're there with them. You are, you really are, but you're also not there. Hearing as you do the constant low hum of, am I real? And isn't it strange we're all just skin bags for cosmic particles? And how can someone you trust with every careful corner of your bones betray you? So you picture the time when you were 8 and you managed not to die when your stepmother made you bike for miles with blood streaming down your leg from that fall through the rusty sewer grate because she said you ruined the ride. Or that morning when she chased you around the house with an open palm and you barely managed to get your brother back in his high chair, screaming before you ran up the stairs 2 steps at a time. And you remember that this is how you did it, not die, by acing every math test and singing Cyndi Lauper songs at recess and giggling at the word boner with your best friend, but keeping every day at a distance, eyes hung heavy on the horizon, there but not there, pedaling, trusting your small heart would hold. So you listen to that sweet student talk about her cat and her dreams of grad school, and will you write me a recommendation letter? And of course, and thank you, and of course, and thank you, and of course, while your mind is moving through the madness of missing the body that betrayed you or puzzling out again, how you could have let your guard down at exactly the wrong moment, how you could have imagined that body would never leave you bloody and biking for miles. So you say, yes, I will write you the most beautiful letter in the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. That's wonderful. Up next, we have Kai Lohrenz. Kai is a Gulf Coast transplant living in Brooklyn. Their poems have appeared in Peach Mag, Ghost City Review, and Street Cake Magazine, among others. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'll be reading my poem, Containment Failure. At the party, I watch drunk men piss in a sink and all I see is freedom. How'd I get here? Eyeing their semis, feigning indifference, waiting for the rain to stop. Tell me how it feels, like the swelling head of a thundercloud before the pleasure of a clap, or nothing at all. Go home. The sink reeks of dehydration, rusting fluids. But one time we swallowed fish whole to see who had the biggest stomach. Ribs in the drain and bellies full of gold. It's the same search for a gulp. Suddenly thirstier than I've ever been in my life. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Kai. Up next, we have Carolina Alessio. Carolyn, rather. Pardon me. Carolyn Alessio? Yeah. Carolyn Alessio lives and writes on Chicago's Southwest Side. Her work has appeared in the Pushcart Prize anthology, Sweet Lit, America, and elsewhere. She has received a fellowship from the National Endowment for the Arts, and her novel manuscript was a finalist for the Penn Bellwether Prize for Socially Engaged Fiction. Welcome.
Hi, thank you. Just to explain the background, when I set it up, I thought it was a good idea to do a Chicago background. And now it looks like my head is the big shiny bean. So the piece is called Contraindicated. My mother once found opiates in the bottom of a used necklace box. She'd heard a clicking sound while lifting out the gold-plated necklace she had just purchased at a dying mall near her home. A half-dozen pills sat hidden under the box's pressed cotton, like a priceless masterpiece that had been painted over with a trite landscape. Someone's going to be looking for those, my mother told me over the phone. I'm glad I used a gift certificate so they couldn't trace me. The idea of my elderly mother and her condo being a target for drug runners was a stretch, but she had always loved mysteries and police procedurals. What's the code on the pills? I said. I can look it up. There's an app. Pill Identifier, it was called, part of drugs.com, and with Pill Finder in parentheses. My mother paused. I'm sorry, she said. I flushed them down the toilet before I remembered you're not supposed to do that anymore. Looking out my gray city window, I remembered reading a report about the most common medications found in public drinking water: birth control, antidepressants, and pain opiates. That blend might alarm some, but it sounded surprisingly soothing to me. 6 years later, when my mother was diagnosed with metastatic cancer during the end of the quarantine, we started out using days of the week dispensers for her many medications. During the first few months, she would call me at home so we could check potential interactions. Sitting at my kitchen table, I'd put her on speakerphone, pull up the drug interaction checker app. Results showed up as minor, significant, serious, and contraindicated. How come the next level up from minor is significant? I remember her asking. Shouldn't there be a gradation or something in between? Sometimes I heard my mother's labored breathing as I typed in all the information, and I wondered silently if I could have detected this clue to lung cancer much earlier. The hospice pharmacist took an extra long dinner break the day we moved my mother into a unit. My brother and I brought all her prescription vials, but the young nurse urged us to take her Dilaudid and other opiates back home. They were fully stocked, she said. Foolishly, I sent it all back with my brother. 4 hours passed, and my mother was starting to twist in her bed in her white nightgown, like a hungry infant shifting around in its bassinet. She still wasn't quite conscious, but I could see the tension in her neck and jaw. Soon she began to mutter. I couldn't find a buzzer for the nurse, so I hurried down the hall to the desk to tell her my mom was ready for her next doses. I'm sorry, the nurse said, the pharmacist's on dinner break. Back in her room, my mother's face was gray, and she was saying words that sounded like epithets I'd never heard from her before. Soon, Mom, I said, soon. I'm so sorry. Freed from numbing opiates, the tumors in her lungs, liver, and bones were throwing off their weighted blankets for the first time in months. I paced, tried to stroke my mother's hair, but even my soft touch was too painful. A light at the top of my mother's bed illuminated a panel of mute medical instruments. The reason we had finally agreed to transfer my mother to the unit was for more ease with medication. We'd been promised subcutaneous injections and fentanyl patches. Now that she was here, however, my mother's pain was even more ragged and uncontrolled than at home. Anyone would have called it contraindicated. Back at the desk, I asked again, citing urgency, but the nurse tipped her head to the side. I'm sorry, she said, he didn't leave a key. Now, 2 years after my mother's death, I sometimes think of that elusive key, unfathomably the only copy at a healthcare facility that prided itself on pain management, as they proclaimed in the hospice brochure. Soon the pain had forced my mother completely awake. Her good eye was open, the other had a tumor behind it and had remained shut for some time. Jesus, she whispered, a name I'd only heard her use respectfully. She repeated it and hissed the S. I paced, ran crying through the halls to find any staff member. Didn't other patients there need pain medication? I even called the 1-800 number for the hospice company, but everyone just urged me to wait a little longer, and we remained marooned in the bland gray office park. That morning, when I rode with my mother in the back of the ambulance, she had been jostled as we wound through the labyrinth road. A soft knock on my mother's open door announced the entrance of an older nurse. Wearing yellow gloves, she came inside and set up her equipment. Soon, she pressed a fentanyl patch on my mother's leg and injected her with Dilaudid. Even before the nurse left, my mother was resting, her body so relaxed and her skin so smooth, I could see some of the freckles covering her cheekbones. The following 2 days, her last, would be similarly serene, but I didn't have that consolation yet. Would you like a blanket for the couch? The nurse asked me after she placed one on my mother. I thanked her, my body feeling weaker than it had after a last-minute cesarean years before. When I went to close the curtains, I peered out in the dim light at the desolate patio just outside the sliding doors. It looked familiar, and after a moment, I realized I'd seen it in the hospice brochure from months before, with a built-in barbecue, promising feasts of glistening vegetables that we would share laughing. State-of-the-art palliative care, the company had boasted. I blinked at the top of the grill, anchored to the ground, its shiny cover firmly shut. Thanks for listening.
Wow, very powerful. Thank you so much, Carolyn. Up next, we have Pat Jameson. And Pat is a writer based in Roanoke, Virginia. His work has appeared or is forthcoming in Smoke Lawn Quarterly, X-Ray, Bull, Maudlin House, Apocalypse Confidential, and Hex, among others. His story, Death Drive, was a finalist for the 2022 Smoke Lawn Quarterly Flash Fiction Award. He is a first reader for Rec and Review. Welcome, Pat.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Yeah, so I'm going to read a story called Distracted today. Thankfully, it is not a true story, so keep that in mind, but it takes place on the other side of Pennsylvania, not on the Philly side. So hopefully you don't hold that against me. But okay, distracted. That afternoon was the afternoon I followed the Starlings across town and accosted a distracted driver. But before that, me and the other irregulars were at Joe's explaining to a new recruit how you could tell whether you were regular or not. The kid's name was Eddie. He was a nice guy, a veteran, a hero or something in the machine gun nest. Not long ago, he'd suffered a wound, won a Purple Heart, but now he was down here in the gutters filled with daytime whiskey and beer, and we felt it was best to bring him quickly up to speed. Listen, I waved my beer around. Listen, have you ever been at a grocery store or mall and someone walks by, just a normal Joe talking on his phone, good haircut, nice teeth, and he says something about shoe shopping or meeting up for brunch and you feel like shouting, Jesus, oh, what the hell was that? You're just so goddamn typical. Oh, sure, Eddie nodded. All the time. Sometimes I look at people and they're like lizard men or lizard women. Sometimes I see things that aren't even there. Good. Audiovisual disruptions. That's the first sign of being irregular. That's how you know something is amiss. Does that make sense? Yeah, but hey, what about these animals, man? What? The fucking animals. Am I seeing these right? Or are they disruptions too? Oh, I said, those. He was talking about the mounted heads on the walls, antelope and lions and water buffalo, once the pride of the savannah, now murdered and hung up for spectacle. The owners of Joe's, Joe was a big-time game hunter. He had the largest collection of safari trophies in the contiguous United States, or at least this corner of Pennsylvania. Forget the animals, I said. They're dead. It's the living you have to worry about. Right. Besides Eddie, the other two in my cadre were the twins, Paul and Rock. They were machine workers, hulking real savants in the gym. Each day they worked out at 6 a.m., showered, and drank wine coolers until sundown. Never any beer because of the calories, I think. Like me, they believed in the regular lifestyle, the idea that there was a world beneath our own, only visible through a haze of alcohol and bad decisions. We all did a round and then another. Everything was going great until I asked Eddie about the war. The war? Yeah, the goddamn war. I've always wondered, I said. Well, I did good things and bad things and things I was proud of, but most of all, yeah, it was, he paused, fucked. What else was there to say? We raised our glasses to Eddie, here. Then the thing happens like it always does. Time sped up and became blurry, malformed. I was suddenly outside and the sun had swiveled from one point in the sky to the other. Fumbling with my car keys, my feet carried themselves down the pavement. My friends yelled at me to come back and quit being a dumbass. Don't go anywhere, I shouted. I'll rally the men. I hit the fob, jumped behind the wheel and screeched out, thudding over the curb. I looked in my mirror, no sirens, detached body bumper or body parts strewn in my wake. Life was good. Once I left Joe's, I just drove east and west and north and south, across railroad tracks and down long country roads, past trailer parks and racetracks and churches, so many churches. I drove until I felt as if I was in communion with the universe, and if that I was patient, something stupendous might happen. At a stoplight near the airport, would you believe me? It did. The sky became suddenly unglued, black shapes swooping and chasing one another, a flock of tiny birds. Yes, these were my starlings. The starlings settled for a bit, pausing long enough for me to follow them down the highway and into the lot behind the old mall. Breaking formation, they lit on the B and the abandoned Best Buy sign. There may be 50 or 100 of them, a veritable army of beaks and eyes, fluttering wings. They stared at me and I stared back, awaiting further instruction. In my pocket, I had a beer I nicked earlier while the bartender was in the John. I cracked it and took a deep swallow. It tasted wonderful. Squawk, squawk, squawk. The starlings were now bowing and bobbing in unison. They seemed to be gesturing towards something, which is when I saw the BMW streaking across the parking lot. Its owner, a vague man shape, was slumped sideways in the seat. The starlings would apeshit. They flew upwards, broke apart, and reformed as an arrow pointing in the BMW's direction. I understood then, wherever this driver was headed, I was going to. Around downtown, I caught the BMW. He was really speeding then, swerving back and forth across the yellow lines. I beat my horn once, twice, and began to flash the high beams, click, clack, click, clack. He must have gotten the message because the car slowed, easing onto the shoulder. I drove up behind him, highlights still pulsing. I wasn't sure what to do next. The starlights hadn't specified, so I hopped out and straight up alongside the driver's side window, beer held out of sight and at hip level. The driver was a young guy, good looking with a vicious black widow's peak. I figured I'd assess his regularity and then proceed from there. He rolled down his window. Yes, sir, I'm an undercover police officer. I'm going to need you to explain why you're driving so erratically. Excuse me, have you been drinking? Is that what's going on? Drinking? How much have you had to drink? Don't lie to me. He looked stricken. Well, none. I haven't had any. I'm lost. Yeah, I made a wrong turn back there somewhere. I was following directions on my phone. He held up his device as evidence. In its glow, I noticed for the first time how smooth the skin was, moisturized, manicured, like a sand belt had run the length of him. And his watch, it flashed glittering like a satellite. I won't even get into the thickness of his hair, but the point is this: everything about this person screamed danger. He was my mortal enemy, the most regular man in the world. With a single call, he could end me. Well, hey, I'm sorry, mister, I said. My mistake. Let's call it a warning. He peered at me, taking notice of the stains on my shirt, the smell of beer wafting between my teeth. Right. Listen, can I see your badge? Badge, the way he said it, I had the sudden fear he might lean forward and bury his teeth in my eye socket. I left it in the car. I'll go get it. 2 seconds. Sure, he said, grinning. Take your time. I forced myself to walk away. Once clear, I threw open the door, revved the engine, peeled out burning rubber and smoke. When I passed a BMW, the driver had his face pressed up against the glass, leering. His features were mask-like, haunting. I'll never forget them. It was the sight of Armageddon, the end of days, the things that come for us all. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Pat. Up next, we have Pat Ryan. Pat's short stories have been published in the literary journal Chautauqua, American Writers Review, The Ghost Story, and The Hopper. Her reviews and articles on movies, music, and literature have appeared in numerous publications, including the New York Times, where she was an editor in the culture department. She is a member of the Massachusetts Cultural Council of Deerfield and president of Deerfield for Responsible Development. Welcome, Pat.
Thank you. Thank everyone at Cleaver, and also thank the cats in the audience. That was a little extra added attraction. The title of my story is The Activist in the Nursing Home, which sort of says what's going on. And I'm going to start on the 3rd paragraph. My own escape happened by chance that morning. I was alone in the room, slumped in a chair, weighted down by world pity and helplessness. Suddenly, a fire alarm went off in a far hallway. The room was empty. The reception desk was unattended. I shed my melancholy and rose up, filled with a primal desire for freedom and for fresh, hot coffee. The door banged behind me as I walked out with a $10 bill in my pocket to buy the strongest cup I could find, one brain-shaking jolt of caffeine. I didn't see the harm in it. It's not as if I were going to zigzag down the road in my flannel nightgown and furry slippers. I had one gulp of espresso at the cafe before the facility's body snatchers found me, escorted me out, and scooped me into their van. I didn't protest. Through it all, I held the cardboard coffee cup upright, not a drop spilled. That was my first escape. The second time, I cashed my Social Security check at the ATM and walked all the way to the big guy grocery store. That was when I had the run-in with Mr. Golfer. I was in the fast checkout line with 6 bags of hot tamale chips, 6 jars of peanut butter, a box of crackers, a package of fudgesicles, and a bouquet of tulips. A man pulled up behind me. This is the express lane, he said. 10 items max. I have 5 items, I said. You have 15 items. He pushed my cart aside. I pushed it back. Move out of the way, lady, he said. Who do you think you are? I countered. I'm a golfer, he said. We play by the rules. I threw the tulips at his face, grabbed the fudgesicles, and was heading for the exit when the body snatchers arrived. That escapade landed me on the watch list. We could be sued, the director said to me. She had learned this in a phone call from the lawyer who represented the management company that operated the nursing home corporation that owned the facility. My name is Val. I have survived breast cancer, chemo and radiation, a heart attack, 3 falls, and 1 hip replacement. Now facing debilitation, I am a resident of the Mountain View Extended Care Facility. In the early days, I tried to make the best of it. I tried to converse with the other inmates by making polite conversation about current events. I asked if they were aware that women's rights were being chipped away. We don't talk politics here, one woman said, swinging her arm to encompass the aquarium parlor. Don't start trouble, she added. She didn't introduce herself. I call her Mrs. Trouble. How did I, a lifelong nonconformist, end up in this place full of old immovable objects? Was it a devil's joke or a deity's punishment to throw me into my special hell? Maybe I'd stepped on some godling's toes during a Save Our Planet protest. So I stopped talking. Cloistered in my room, I wear big black headphones and listen to NPR on my radio. Today is the summer solstice. During the winter months, escape was on hold because I lacked protective clothing. The winter had been bleaker than ever before. It seemed longer too. Reluctant to leave, its bone-chilling damp remained far into the springtime. I had waited it out. I had been patient. For my reward, a silver lining appeared in the cloud of gloom. I now have a friend, a short but sturdy woman named Esther. Her skin is the color of parchment, her hair is metallic silver, and her eyes are black-brown. I can't discern her ethnicity. Then again, who knows what anyone's ethnicity is? We're all hybrids, and it matters not. Thank you.
Amazing. Wonderful. Thank you.
She does get into more trouble.
Can't wait. Up next is Brendan Stevens. Brandon, if you're ready. Brandon is a writer hailing from Western Maryland. His work has appeared in Pinch, Epoch, Smokelong Quarterly, the Southeast Review, and elsewhere. His awards include multiple imprint Donald Bartolome Awards and Into the Void Fiction Prize and a Sequestrum Emerging Writer Award. Brandon earned his PhD in creative writing and literature from the University of Houston. Currently, he serves as a submissions editor for Smokelong Quarterly. Welcome, Brandon.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone from Cleaver. Yeah, I'm just going to read the first part of a kind of longer story that I've been describing as kind of a buddy comedy about an Anglo-Saxon warlord and a video game streamer becoming rock climbing pals in hell. So here's, I'm just going to read the first little bit of it. Long ago, after I died, I found myself alone in a vast wasteland with nothing on the horizon except a single imposing mountain gray with distance. This wasn't paradise. I'd never been a believer, just an ordinary sinner. Beside me lay a tightly coiled nylon rope, a pouch full of chalk, pittons, a climbing hammer, and a rock climbing harness in the dried out clay, the waist belt covered in carabiners. No explanation was necessary. I was supposed to make my way up the ice-capped peak so far away. From where I stood, it had to be at least 30-mile hike before beginning the long, long climb. It'd take me days, maybe weeks, to summit the mountain and discover what awaited me. Either way, I had nothing else to do. I slung the harness over my shoulder and headed off, the cracked copper-colored earth scorching my feet. I only had what I'd been died wearing, which unfortunately was just pajama bottoms. I'd woozily gone to sleep, not realizing there'd been a carbon monoxide leak. If only I would have died wearing shoes. As I walked, in the distance, a far-off figure deeper in the wasteland hustled, almost sprinting towards the mountain until I lost sight of them in the wavy heat. Why the rush? We had plenty of time down here. By sunset, I hadn't even made it close to the mountain's base. My mouth was sticky with dehydration and my pulled muscles stung sharp. I'd never been a fit guy. And once I started streaming video games full time, I didn't have time for exercise. I've been known for marathon streams where I gamed for 24 hours minimum. Still, I surprised myself at how far I'd gone. I collapsed. However, when I woke, the mountain seemed farther away than when I'd fallen asleep the night before. as if I'd lost yesterday's miles while retaining the aching joints and torn muscles. So once again, I pushed on and again woke up right where I'd started. Then I understood. Giving the damned an impossible goal was a joke. I stopped trying. Lifetimes went on. Yet when I squinted into the horizon, each morning the same figure hurried out of sight as the sun rose. Over and over, uselessly, they strove. Once or twice, I tried to catch up so I could talk some sense into them, but I was never fast enough to even make it within shouting distance. I wanted to grab of whoever they were and shake them, saying, haven't you realized that hope is our torment? That mountain loomed in the distance, out of reach. I wasn't sure if God, Satan, or some other force had made this place, but whoever it was, they appreciated subtlety. I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you, Brendan. And our last, but certainly not least reader is Matthew Burrell. Drop his link in really quick. And Matthew is a reformed expatriate who spent much of his life in strange places. He lived in Tokyo for 3 years and in southern Thailand, all over really, for another 4 years. Before that, he served in the US military and completed tours of Iraq and Bosnia and Herzegovina. A sometimes dissident who's been through his fair share of immigration snafus, Matthew is empathic to the plights of the marginalized and disenfranchised everywhere. A graduate of Converse College MFA program, he is most interested in the fiction whose subject matter makes readers uncomfortable yet enlightened. He is currently looking for a publisher for his completed novel, Legends of the East. Welcome.
Hello, I'm going to read from 5 Seconds, which is based on a training exercise tragedy in southern Texas. Start. JD stood up without his grenade pin. We were heading toward the Guadalupe Range after a live fire exercise in White Sands Training Grounds, otherwise known as the Sandbox, during a hot afternoon in July 1998, when the last guard post of safety that kept us living, breathing, connected tissue instead of imploded molecules of gelatinous red goop, the grenade clip caught on JD's entrenching tool, just charging into the air, and afterward, Ramirez swore he could hear the material ignition over the clanging of everything else, all the battle rattle, entrenching tools, canteens, compasses, magazines, warm brass shell casings, like the telltale vibration of a rattlesnake's tail. The exterior walls of the Bradley, 30 millimeters of space laminate armor, were impenetrable to small caliber ammunition. But inside, all that armor had the inverse effect, creating an enclosure that would multiply the devastation of an explosion by tenfold to its passengers, the 118th Infantry Detachment out of Forest Park, Illinois, 3rd Squad, which consisted of myself, Squad Leader Sergeant Mack, Spec Ramirez, Private John David Stewart, who everyone called JD, and the gunner in the turret, Corporal Carlson. Sergeant Mack was the first to notice the orphan clip and yelled, "That ain't no dummy grenade," while simultaneously grabbing JD and wrestling down into the first compartment. Ramirez hurled himself on the floor with his hands over his Kevlar, like they trained us to do back in basic. I turtled up where I sat on the cargo netting near the rear. It all happened because JD had ramboed his grenades earlier in the day by removing the safety clips to make quicker throws. A great concept in the movies, but a pretty shitty one in real life. Because JD wasn't Sylvester Stallone, we had roughly 5 seconds before detonation. 5 seconds in the Army could feel like an eternity. Before all of this, before you could become a passenger of a Bradley fighting vehicle, before you were field certified to carry live grenades, fire live ammunition, or even touch an M16 rifle, You must sign your life away to a recruiter in an ironclad contract that says you belong to the Army and are thereby and henceforth and forevermore property of the United States of America. When the recruiter sues your mother with talk of government benefits, new skills, access to the GI Bill, affordable education, they never mention the fact you're more likely to die in a helicopter crash during a training exercise than actual combat. Or that when you finally do get sent overseas, percentages say you'll get KIA'd in a vehicle rollover rather than a roadside bomb. The recruiter fails to state the #1 killer of veterans in America isn't physical injury, but mental health. And the rate of suicide among veterans is more than twice the rate of Joe Q. Public. I can't speak to what JD's recruiter told his mother, but I will say JD loved the Army more than any of us. Sergeant Mack liked to say he was blessed or cursed with the right combination of small town Hoosier, having never left the Midwest except to go to South Carolina for basic training, and a woodsman hunter ingenuity that was requisite of good soldiering. And unlike the rest of us, who were disinclined to speak fondly of the military, we tried not to speak of the Army at all, except in laconic terminology and outright cursing its very existence. JD was a proud lifer from day one. First to the rifle range and last to Chow, loved to spend hours breaking down the M16, part by part, scrubbing the inner workings with cotton swabs before applying copious amounts of lubricating oil to the bolt and reassembling the weapon. Highest scores in marksmanship, the physical fitness test, the urban warfare course, mountaineering, navigation, airborne. The rest of us bullshitted about going to Ranger School in order to appear squared away. But JD was already waitlisted in the fall class at Benning and serious about doing it. The other thing you should know about JD is that up until we arrived at Fort Bliss, Texas, he was a virgin. In fact, both of us were. That was probably why we became such close battle buddies in a compressed military time frame and stuck together during the reservist annual training. In the evenings, after a day in the field of playing soldier, the rest of the unit would go out to the enlisted club to drink Miller Lite, smoke cigarettes, and shoot pool. And JD and I would go to the barracks and continue to play soldier on call of duty. We didn't smoke, but JD showed me how to chew on sunflower seeds, a handful at a time, sucking the salt out of the shells, getting the bits caught in your teeth, and spitting the rest into an empty water bottle. The grappling we learned in hand-to-hand combat, we practiced there on the dust-swept floor among the discarded sunflower shells, twisting each other into figure fours, hyperextending joints, and constricting chokes in a game we called blackout or tap out. And when the rest of the soldiers came back drunk, we had all our equipment out and prepped for training the next day. JD, who was otherwise thin as a popsicle stick, cut a mighty stoic figure in pressed BDUs, spit-shine combat boots, and all the knee pads and camo vests an Army surplus store could stock. But up close, the most defining features were an unblemished face, rosy cheeks, and peach fuzz gravelly like dirt across the upper lip. He was 19 years old, and so was I. Before the grenade detonates in 4 seconds, JD and I must first lose our virginity, which is an impossible task in a place like El Paso. Back in those days, Fort Bliss wasn't a big military base like it is today, but a barren, dusty stretch of warehouses and missile batteries and rows of barracks and churches and more barracks. It was the antithesis of the dictionary meaning of bliss because the military is full of irony. Flat as a saucer and every building the same, and not a single female at the enlisted club. Not just one of the worst places in CONUS, it ranked up there with the worst places in the world, period. I'll stop there.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yep.
Thank you everyone for reading and for being such a great audience. We hope that you continue to follow the magazine, read the rest of the pieces in their entirety. Thank you to our readers for sharing, and thank you too for honoring Cleaver with the great privilege to take care of and house and steward your work. Karen, do you want to have the last word?
Yeah, I'm just so blown away by the quality and the depth and the variety of the poetry and the prose and the nonfiction, or the nonfiction and the fiction that we heard tonight. I mean, it's just such, it's so good. It's just so wonderful. Thank you, all of you, for trusting us with your work and allowing us to, present it to the world and to be stewards of it. One of the things that we hope is that if you're on social media, if you'll post your piece and also amplify the other work that you heard tonight, because, as an online magazine, we can spread your work much further than in the old days. In print magazines, you never knew who was reading it and who had access to it. But we can see, like, when your work is spread, and it'll be read for years to come. So, please do post links to your pieces and please to other pieces that you heard tonight that you appreciate. It just helps to spread the word. And yeah, if anyone has any questions, we can open up the mics for a minute. And otherwise, thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your wonderful work.
Thank you, everyone. Yes, anybody has comments or questions, feel free. Otherwise, look out for our next reading and for our offerings coming up in the fall and winter, and enjoy the rest of your summer.
Yeah, issue 43 will come out in September, and it'll have the results of our poetry competition that was judged by Diane Seuss. So we're very excited about that, and some other things. And then we'll be soon launching our little project with Drexel, so you can play video games with. It's not just poetry, it's also some flash fiction and some creative nonfiction based in Philadelphia. So that's exciting. And yeah, just keep going and doing the beautiful stuff that you do. Thank you.